1.5 minutes to answer. What actions will you take to restore people's confidence in the integrity of the legislative branch?
Great, thank you for that question. So I think what I often tell my constituents is politics is a contact sport. Yes, it's rough and tumble, but more importantly, what I mean by that is you as a constituent have a great say in bringing integrity to the office. You need to contact your elected officials. You need to share what's important to you. And that's what I've done being a Maryland State delegate for the past 8 years. I meet my constituents wherever they want to meet me, whether it's a Panera closest to them, whether it's in my home, or whether it's in my office, to hear the issues that matter most to them. Because ultimately, what people want to see is how government can help them. And how do we get to that? Well, we get to that by listening to people, coming up with solutions that work for them. And that's what I've done. Another way to bring integrity to the legislative office is to make sure that we cast a wider net. People that are being elected should be reflective of the communities that they come from. And right now, we're not really seeing that. We need to bring greater diversity to the people that are elected. And why this is important is because once you do that, then other communities will get engaged, will want to come and vote, will have greater voter participation, and strengthen our democracy as a result of this. And this is how we get integrity to the legislative office, to cast that wider net. Thank you.
Andrew, got the same question, please. What actions will you take to restore people's confidence in the integrity of the legislative branch?
I will tell you, we've got a lot of work to do because right now our government is shut down by the legislative branch because people can't talk to each other. And it starts with fundamental campaign finance reform. I support John Sarbanes' bill that would provide public financing. But we need to overturn Citizens United. That's just the first step. But it really goes back further than that. There's Buckley v. Vallejo, which was the decision in the 70s that said money is a form of speech. I do not believe that is true. I believe in a principle of one person, one vote, not $1, one vote. I do not believe that somebody, just because they can buy a $15 million megaphone, should have a louder voice than somebody who's just willing to work hard. I think we need an equal voice. I think when it comes to the legislature in specific, we need to be upfront about the Republicans' implementation of the Hastert rule. The Hastert rule is wrong. We would not have our government shut down today if we had a clean vote on DACA, if we had a clean vote on immigration reform, if we had a clean vote on CHIP. All of those things would pass. But the Hastert rule is stopping it. So we need to call that out. And if Congress is going to shut down the government, right now, we need to change the law so Congress doesn't get paid if they can't pass a budget.
I like that.
And David Schrone, 1.5 minutes, please. What actions will you take to restore people's confidence in the integrity of the legislative branch?
That's really pretty much an easy one there. Integrity, confidence. What's destroyed that? The money. The money has destroyed that. The PAC money, the lobbyist money. That's why government can't shut down. That's why government did shut down. That's why government can't get anything done. So we're not going to have to spend any time taking PAC money. We're not going to take any lobbyist money, and we never will. Because my interest is to be your congressman, not the big pharmaceutical industry, not the other PACs, not the lobbyists, not their person. The PAC are what gave us the opioid crisis. 70,000 people last year died of opioids. That's mind-boggling. If that continues, it's going to be over 1 million people in the next 10 years. That's more than every man, woman, and child in Baltimore. It's mind-boggling. But it's not about the numbers, it's about individuals. It's about unique people like my nephew Ian, who died last year on New Year's Eve of a fentanyl overdose at 24. This is something that's personal. This is something that we have to all pull together as Americans, and we can win this. But we can't win it when we're always up against the big pharmaceutical pack, which was a #1 pack last year in the country on donations. And after that, we got to fix gerrymandering.
Thank you. Kevin Caldwell, what actions will you take to restore people's confidence in the integrity of the legislative branch?
Well, first off, Congress, over the last many decades, have been controlled by both major parties at one time or another. And the highest approval rating they've ever been able to manage in those decades is 13%, a whopping 13% at that. You know, there's a great line from the movie Charlie Wilson's War. The congressman is asked, why is it that Congress says one thing and always does another? His answer is very simple and poignant. Tradition, mostly. It is not hard for the common citizen to see that the ruling establishment of D.C. does not represent their interests. Nor is it hard for them to see that for decade after decade, that same ruling class, the ruling establishment controlled by both major parties, Democrats and Republicans, bend their wills not to serve you and I, the American people, but to serve the agendas of their true paymasters from Wall Street and K Street. That's where legislation actually originates. The two ruling parties have taken over $30 billion from the registered lobbyists in the last 10 years. That does not include foreign lobbyists or other special interests. I alone, as a freshman libertarian congressman, cannot change Congress. But you can. You have the power. The power is yours. It is a very simple plan. It requires no legislation and not a single tax dollar. Simply at the ballot in 2018 in November, do not vote for candidates who represent parties that are so controlled by the ruling establishment, the party establishment, lobby, and special interests. That is the easiest way to take power, the control of this country back and put it into your hands. Thank you.
Roger Mano, what actions will you take to restore people's confidence in the integrity of the legislative branch? You have 1.5 minutes, please.
I think we're doing that now, or we're trying to do that now. I think the most important thing is you know who you work for. Folks who I work for, the 128,000 people who have sent me to Annapolis 3 times, know that I belong to them because I work tirely for them. There's a couple of things you can't do in this business. Voters are very, very forgiving. There's 2 things you can't do. You can't lie and you can't take money, right? Those are fireable offenses in politics. A few years ago, we had a delegate who was elected on an issue of equality for everyone in my district. I'm not going to mention his name. He was elected on the issue of equality, marriage equality, right? So that everyone, no matter who they love, where they came from, is able to share in marriage just like straight people. 5 years into his first term, 5 weeks into his first term, he turned his back. And we were faced with a very unfortunate situation in my district, but I supported my law student to run against that guy because it was a fireable offense, and she won. I'll give you another example. When I was faced with a decision as the chair of the AELR committee, the regulatory committee, as to what to do with Governor Hogan's fracking regulations, right, the gold standard of fracking in America, and everyone told me, do not mess with those regulations. The bosses in Annapolis, the bosses in DC, do not mess with those regulations. I use the authority, the trust that you have given me to unilaterally stop Governor Hogan's fracking regulations that would have began drilling on October 1st, 2017, before we banned fracking. I think that that helps to restore the trust in government.
Thank you. Nadia Hashimi will be answering this question last. What actions will you take to restore people's confidence in the integrity of the legislative branch?
You know, I don't think I have a lot of confidence in the legislative branch when I see that they can't even get President Trump off of Twitter. There's a real lack of power there. I think the other problem with going last in these forums is that everyone has said everything that you've been preparing. But I will reiterate that some of the highlights, we do need to get the money out of politics, because that's really what sways people's minds. It's undeniable. When you've got big corporations, when you've got the lobbying money, and you have lobbyists actually writing bills for members of Congress. That really happens. And we allow that to happen because we have enabled lobbying to become an industry on its own. We've got to get the money out of politics. We've got to increase the interaction with members of Congress. So we've got to push for more town halls. Capitol Hill should not be some far-off land that we cannot reach. Every citizen should feel a direct connection to his or her member of Congress, to his or her representative at every level. So that's what I will do. I will bring to mind, as I serve, and with your votes, if I'm honored to have them, every patient story, every interaction, everything that has propelled me to stand up and choose to represent my community. Because that's really what should be guiding my decisions. It's not any corporation, it's not NRA dollars, which surely will not come my way when they hear what I have to say, but it's standing up for the people. Thank you.
The next question, we will start with Andrew Duck, and the question is, with so many pressing calls for change, such as Me Too, Black Lives Matter, living wage, how will you harness the energy from these important movements for equality into action for greater justice instead of just a moment in history? You have 2.5 minutes, please.
We need to seize upon the energy that is out there today, and we need to put it into organizations that will endure. And that's what I have been doing for over 12 years. When I started to try to change the 6th Congressional District from a R+14 district to one where a Democrat had a decent chance, and in fact, we got an advantage, I started by recognizing that Western Maryland was being totally ignored by our Democratic Party in Annapolis. And I said, that's unacceptable. And we realized that Frederick County alone was not going to be able to get their attention. So we teamed with Washington County and Allegheny County and Garrett County, and I was one of the people who helped organize the first Western Maryland Democratic Caucus. That caucus continues to this day, and if you want to run for a statewide office, you come to the Western Maryland Democratic Caucus because that's where voters are. That's the sort of organization where you leave behind an organization. You can't just do grassroots organizing for one election. My campaign is not part of just getting me elected. This is one step in a movement that began 12 years ago. And it started with, among other things, me presenting a class to all Democrats across Western Maryland of how to talk to fundamentalists. Because we had to reach out beyond the base that we had. When I saw, once we got a shift, I stopped being so active in politics and I started working on green energy. But when I saw the election with a governor, where I found out I had a Governor Hogan and a President Trump, I said, I've got to get busy again. I've got to get busy again. The following weekend, I hosted a Love Trump's Hate rally in Frederick at Baker Park. That has turned into an organization that persists to this day called Frederick Cares. They're participating in the Women's March right now instead of being here at this forum, because that's more important. I was instrumental in organizing Our Revolution Western Maryland to keep the Bernie supporters active, get them organized in Western Maryland. I've been active in a host of other organizations. I started a fixoureconomy.org when the economy collapsed, with advocating for the right policies for economic justice. Those sorts of things stay and persist.
Thank you. And a question for David Trone, please. With so many pressing calls for change, how will you harness the energy from these important movements for equality into action for greater justice instead of just a moment in history?
Yeah.
Can you speak up? I didn't hear the question.
Sure. Let me ask the question again. With so many pressing calls for change, such as Me Too, Black Lives Matter, living wage. How will you harness the energy from these important movements for equality into action for greater justice instead of just a moment in history?
I think it's a great question. We're at a wonderful point in time where we can make real change. I think in our case, I've been working to make change for a long, long time and been very successful in a lot of different areas. People look at me and think about it as a business person, but they don't see the work that I do and my family has done across America. Let's start with the American Civil Liberties Union. I've been working with them for over 20 years. The American Civil Liberties Union, we put together a task force to attack the recidivism problem we have in America. We have 25% of the world's prisoners in America and 5% of the population. Recidivism rates are 75%. It's absolutely unacceptable. Our family is pulling together disparate groups because there's two solutions. It's education. And we brought in the United Negro College Fund with Michael Lomax to address the 4th grade average education in prisons. And we brought in business because we need jobs for the folks that are returning citizens. And we put our money where our mouth is. At Total Wine & More, we've hired over 100 returning citizens. And we're seeing those folks stay with the company and prosper. We've also stepped up in the Muslim ban. We've worked through our foundation to provide legal representation for all of the affected countries and their folks that don't know where to turn. They don't know what to do. So our representative and legal counsel has worked with over 1,000 plus folks already to date. And they're doing that every day of the week. Third area is health care. I've worked hard on a number of different issues. The first with Johns Hopkins on a giant lipid study that every one of you will see the result in is your LDL numbers, what's on your cholesterol checks, is been redone. It's been recalculated through a giant database study of over 5 million folks we've done with Hopkins to be more accurate so we can see what our cardiac care problems are. We've also worked with Suburban Hospital, where I'm a trustee, to how we can attack substance addiction and how we can attack mental illness, because those two things are totally connected, along with the problem of recidivism. Thank you.
Kevin Caldwell, with so many calls for change, how will you harness the energy from these important movements for equality into action for greater justice instead of just a moment in history?
The struggle against injustice and the struggle for liberty are timeless. There will never be a shortage of those who commit injustice against another. That is why we must guard against the removal of power out of the hands of the individual citizen. It is the concentration of power that has down into the hands of the few that has allowed those in power to perpetrate abuses upon their victims. It is also the silent complicity of those who sought to benefit from association with those in power. Power concentrated into the hands of the few over the many is the biggest evil that mankind faces. Power must always remain in the hands of the individual citizen, because it is our treatment of one another, our honoring of a social contract as individuals and as society as a whole that will determine our fate as a nation. The fate of our great country will depend upon our unity in the cause of one another, or our disintegration into division based on superficial attributes. We all know that the preamble to the Constitution begins with, "We the people," in order to form a more perfect union. I hope to always remind my fellow citizens that the Declaration of Independence ends with, "We mutually pledge to one another our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." No matter the differences between us, ethnicity, political affiliation, economic status, or any other distinction, imagined or real, I promise you one fact is guaranteed beyond all certainty. Whether we rise to the heights of unity, wisdom, and enlightenment, or sink down into the very depths of hate, despotism, and despair, we will meet our fate together as Americans. Thank you very much.
And please, if I could just ask the audience to turn off any noise-making devices, so as not to interrupt our speakers. Roger Mano, the same question. With so many pressing calls for change, such as Me Too, Black Lives Matter, living wage, how will you harness the energy from these important movements for equality into action for greater justice instead of just a moment in history?
My mother, when she was 8 months pregnant, she was waiting tables in California, and some guy slapped her backside. And she went to talk to her manager, and the guy said, "Just be happy you have a job." On behalf of my mom, me too, I feel like I've been an activist my whole life, my whole career. I've worked with great organizations from Progressive Neighbors to, Black Lives Matter, to my friends in progressive advocacy groups around the country and globally to advance the cause of justice and equal rights and equal protections under the law and human rights internationally. And so as somebody who is constantly involved in those movements, it comes very naturally to me. And I take that work into my office. My first year in the House of Delegates, as some of you may know, I was running a universal single-payer healthcare outreach shop to gather up lawmakers from around America, state lawmakers who support H.R. 676. That's the advocate, the activist in me, working together with great advocacy organizations. And I think the best lawmakers, the best policymakers are those that understand that there's not much of a distinction between those two worlds and are able to integrate them together. Thank you.
And Nadia Hashimi, with so many pressing calls for change, how will you harness the energy from these important movements for equality into action for greater justice instead of just a moment in history?
I think it's important for all of us to encourage and maintain safe spaces for conversation. So where we are engaging and where we have a forum online, or if it's in person in a town hall, we should be able to acknowledge the struggles of other people, even if it's not our own. So while your struggle may not look like mine, I should be willing to stand up for you. And you should be willing to hear my case and stand up for me. We have to be able to connect people in that way and make sure that those voices are continuously heard and amplified. We should uplift one another. But we also need to make sure that we take those negatives and turn them into positives, because that outrage can be a channel to bring change. That's what's happened to me. Let me tell you about my day yesterday, because it was an incredible day. A year ago, I attended the Women's March. And I attended the Women's March out of outrage, because we had elected a president. I'll say we, but it wasn't me. Somebody had elected a president that could speak about women in the most derogatory way, who could speak about different populations of people as if they were less than Americans. A year later, yesterday, I attended the Women's March, not just as a physician who was there to hold up a sign, but I had the opportunity to stand alongside leaders of the feminist majority, Eleanor Smeal, and receive their official endorsement. And I had the opportunity to address an amazing and enraged crowd of thousands of women, because we had had enough. And we were able to take that outrage, turn it around, and mobilize it into something positive. And that's why you see in this year a different kind of person running for candidacy. You have women running in unbelievable numbers. You've got people of diverse backgrounds coming to the forefront, because we're recognizing that in this moment, not only is it urgent for us to do so, but it is possible for us to achieve the American dream and protect that American dream for the generations that are depending on us to do our jobs. Thank you, and I'd like to
Bruna Miller will address this question last. With so many pressing calls for change, such as Me Too, Black Lives Matter, living wage, how will you harness this energy from these important movements for equality into action for greater justice instead of just a moment in history?
Thank you. First thing we need to recognize is these are movements and not moments. But every movement starts with a moment. We look back on history, Rosa Parks, when she refused to sit down in 1955 on that bus seat, it started the civil rights movement. When we talk about, feminine mystique, I don't know if some of you have read that book, that started the first, in the 1970s, the feminism movement. When we look back on the tragic loss of Trayvon Martin, it started the Black Lives Matter movement. These are moments that started and triggered powerful movements. And we have to remember that also when we woke up on that November 7th morning in 2016 in disbelief on who got elected to be president of our country, that was a moment that triggered another movement, the Women's March, right? This was held over 400 cities throughout the country, over 80 countries, over 7 continents. This started because every one of you cared so deeply about the values of our country. And you care about that our rights should be protected. And that's what started it and triggered it. Change is not going to happen because any one of us are going to get elected to office. We're the messenger of it. It's going to start because every one of you care deeply about the issues as we move forward. Now, that particular change with the Women's March started incredible, powerful groups here in Montgomery County, including Do the Most Good, including Montgomery County Women, MoCo Women, including Jaywalkers and Communities United Against Hate. This is how we bring about change. Because when these movements happen, it's not just a moment, we're talking about systemic changes that people are looking to see. And it happens when every one of us is engaged and make sure that we work collectively. Because as Dr. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement or the Me Too movement or the fight for 15, these are all things that affect us as Americans, and we need to be united on the front to make sure we fight for social justice. That's what it's all about. Thank you.
Thank you. So.